Hello, all you freedom-loving people. President Trump proposed a $2,000 dividend check and pardoned many involved in the 2020 election controversy. The Senate took steps toward ending the government shutdown, and the BBC and the New York Times are being accused of fake Trump news. Okay, let's get into it. Yesterday, the Senate took the first step toward ending the government shutdown. The Senate voted 60-40 with a group of moderate Democrats who agreed to break the filibuster and proceed to end the shutdown. The agreement that resulted from days of backroom negotiations had three main parts. It included the Clean House Pass funding bill to keep the government running until January. This would give lawmakers time to come up with long-term bills to fund the government through the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th. It also included a vote on a smaller three-part budget plan called a minibus, and it included a promise from Senate Majority Leader John Thune that the Senate will vote later this year on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies. But the agreement does not guarantee that the health care subsidies will be extended. The minibus budget plan could greenlight full-year funding for the three sectors of the government and could ensure that all three sectors will maintain funding even if there is another shutdown in 2026. For the legislative branch of the government, this funding will be for the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Veteran Affairs, for military construction, and for the Food and Drug Administration. The minibus will also fund SNAP and WIC, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for women, infants, and children through September 30th. The agreement also proposes reversing cuts to the federal workforce that occurred during the shutdown. These workers would be reinstated and will receive back pay when the shutdown is over. Yesterday, the finalization of the test vote was delayed when Senator John Cornyn was not present. He was late due to flight delays caused by the shutdown, but Cornyn eventually arrived at the Senate and he cast the 60th vote for the test vote around 11 p.m. when the chamber erupted in cheers. The 7 Democrats who voted for the package include Senators Dick Durbin, Tim Kaine, Jeanne Shaheen, Catherine Cortez Masto, Jackie Rosen, Mackey Hassan, and John Fetterman. Angus King, who is an independent senator, also voted for the package. But Republican Senator Rand Paul still voted against the package. In fact, moderate senators expected more Democrats to support them since about 10 to 12 took part in the negotiations, but only 5 ended up changing their vote, which was just enough for Republicans. King, Masto, and Fetterman had already been voting to reopen the government since the beginning of the shutdown. Yesterday, Thune praised the agreement and he called an immediate vote to begin the final process of approving it as the shutdown continued to disrupt flights nationwide, threaten food assistance, and leave federal workers without pay. Returning to the White House yesterday evening after attending the NFL game with the Washington Commanders, President Trump did not say whether he endorsed the agreement, but he said it looks like we're getting close to the shutdown ending. Today, the Senate was set to hold a final vote to approve the agreement, but even with the Senate taking steps to end the shutdown, its effects are still causing major travel disruptions. More than 3,000 flights were being delayed, and at least 1,600 were being canceled as of today at 11 a.m. So President Trump called on air traffic controllers to return to work. President Trump said in a post on Truth Social that air traffic controllers should return to work immediately and that he would reward those who didn't take any time off work. BBC director Tim Davie and his head of news, Deborah Turnus, have resigned. The British news outlet has repeatedly been criticized for its biased reporting, including the misleading editing of a speech by President Trump to make it sound like he was urging people to attack the U.S. Capitol on January 6. The edited speech by President Trump was presented in a documentary called Panorama that was aired 1 week before the 2024 presidential election. In his speech in Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021, President Trump said, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women." However, in the Panorama edit, he was shown saying, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol and I'll be there with you and we fight. We fight like hell." The two sections of the speech that were edited together were more than 50 minutes apart. The White House denounced the BBC as a propaganda machine. President Trump has slammed the BBC for corrupt journalists, accusing them of arbitrarily editing President Trump's speeches and damaging his reputation. In a post on True Social, President Trump wrote, "These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they are from a foreign country, one that many consider our number one ally. What a terrible thing for democracy." British Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy called the matter extremely serious yesterday. Although the BBC has a strong global reputation, it has been criticized in recent years for taking a liberal stance. Critics claim that the BBC has failed to fulfill its promise to report the news objectively. Consequently, the venerable news outlet is struggling in the current, highly polarized political and social environment. A leaked internal memo has put a lot of pressure on the BBC. The memo came from Michael Prescott, who is a former independent external advisor to the broadcaster's Editorial Standards Committee. The document said, Panorama's distortion of the day's event would leave viewers asking, why should the BBC be trusted and where will this all end? When the issue was raised with managers, the memo said they refused to accept that there had been a breach of standards. In addition, the memo exposes the anti-Israel bias in the BBC's Arabic channel's coverage of the Gaza war and the fact that some stories that were raising tough questions around gender issues have been stopped by a handful of staff. And the BBC has come under scrutiny over a number of other different issues in recent weeks. On October 17th, the BBC was also condemned by the media regulator for breaching broadcasting rules. This followed a BBC report from Gaza in which the main narrator was a child. He was the son of a senior Hamas official. Ofcom ruled that the failure to specify this family relationship amounted to gross deception. Yesterday, Tim Davie, who has been at the helm of the BBC since 2020, said that he had decided to step down after reflecting on the immense personal and professional pressure of managing the role during these frenzied times over the years. Davie denied allegations of bias in the BBC's reporting, but he admitted that the news organization is not perfect. Davie said, "In these increasingly polarized times, the BBC is of unique value and speaks to the very best of us. It helps make the UK a special place, overwhelmingly kind, tolerant, and curious. Like all public organizations, the BBC is not perfect, and we must always be open, transparent, and accountable." He said that the recent scandal was not the only reason for his resignation, but it was indeed an important factor. Davie stated, "Well, not being the only reason, the current debate around BBC News has understandably contributed to my decision. Overall, the BBC is delivering well, but there have been some mistakes made, and as Director General, I have to take ultimate responsibility." In his statement, Davie said, "You will ask, why now? Why this moment? It is a sensitive time for the BBC, with the government set to review the corporation's royal charter, which essentially gives it the right to exist before the current term expires in 2027. Davie said, "That is why I want to create the best conditions and space for a new Director General to come in and positively shape the next royal charter. I hope that as we move forward, a sensible, calm, and rational public conversation can take place about the next chapter of the BBC." Deborah Turnus, the chief executive of BBC News, also announced her resignation. She said, "The ongoing controversy around the panorama on President Trump has reached a stage where it is causing damage to the BBC, an institution that I love. As the CEO of BBC News and Current Affairs, the buck stops with me, and I took the decision to offer my resignation to the Director General last night." President Trump also took action against the BBC. A letter from President Trump's attorney Alejandro Brito demanded that the BBC immediately retract the false, defamatory, disparaging, and inflammatory statements. The BBC should also apologize and appropriately compensate President Trump for the harm caused or face legal action for $1 billion in damages. The letter stated that if the BBC fails to meet the demands by November 14, 2025 at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, then President Trump will pursue legal action seeking at least $1 billion in damages. In response, a BBC spokesperson said that the organization would review the letter and provide direct response soon. And today, BBC Chairman Shamir Shah appeared before a parliamentary committee. But before his testimony, the BBC aired an interview with Shah apologizing for how President Trump's speech was edited.
The apologizing is for the way the team edited President Trump's speech to his supporters on January the 6th. Part of the problem is the way it was edited. Yeah. But what was the consequence of that? I think we just needed to go into a bit more detail, which is what we finally did, which was the impression it left on the British audience, as opposed to the intention of the programme, which was to give the panorama, the British audience, some understanding of how President Trump supporters were reading it.
Before his testimony, Shah also sent a letter to the Commons Culture, Media and Sports Committee and acknowledged that the edit of President Trump's speech was an error of judgment. Shah also said that the BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee discussed the footage edits in January and May of 2025 as part of a broader review of U.S. election coverage, not because of a complaint. Shah said that the findings were shared with the Panorama team. He also admitted that it would have been better to take formal action at the time. President Trump has recently criticized the New York Times. He has repeatedly labeled the newspaper as fake news. The trigger this time could have been a couple of articles published by the New York Times after the October 30th Trump-Xi meeting. One was titled, "Who Walked Away Stronger in U.S.-China Trade Talks?" And the other was, "The Art of Letting Trump Claim a Win While Walking Away Stronger." President Trump said the failing New York Times and its third-rate reporters, Lily Kuo and David Pearson, did everything possible to make my very successful meeting with President Xi of China look as bad as possible, when in fact it was a spectacular success. He also said the newspaper misinterpreted the facts. President Trump said that the New York Times completely misrepresented the facts and failed to report the end result. The end result being that China withdrew its rare earth export threat, bought U.S. soybeans and other agricultural products, and agreed to pay tariffs. President Trump's post reads, "This was a big victory for the U.S. and indeed the world. Also, it was a wonderful outcome for China." And the fact that these two major powers left the meeting as it began with an excellent relationship and specific plans for future talks and meetings. But President Trump did not specify which stories he was referring to. But he again called the New York Times fake news. President Trump concluded by writing, "For the failing New York Times to be trying to spin this great event negatively when it was the exact opposite is a disgrace to journalism. No wonder they are doing so badly. They are, after all, the fake news." According to the U.S. pardon attorney Ed Martin yesterday, President Trump has pardoned a number of prominent figures who were involved in the 2020 election controversy. A pardon document shared by Martin on social media lists 77 individuals. It includes many of the names we've heard so often over the years. Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, and attorneys Sidney Powell and John Eastman. Also pardoned was Jenna Ellis, President Trump's 2020 campaign lawyer, and former Arizona GOP Chair Kelly Ward and her husband Michael Ward. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt praised the people that President Trump pardoned as great Americans. Leavitt said these great Americans were persecuted and put through hell by the Biden administration for challenging an election, which is the cornerstone of democracy. The document states, "This proclamation ends a grave national injustice perpetrated upon the American people following the 2020 presidential election and continues the process of national reconciliation. Presidential pardons only apply to federal charges, not state or local charges." The document also says that the pardon does not apply to President Trump. President Trump said yesterday that he would take money from the federal government tariff revenues to give most Americans a share of the profits, with each person getting at least $2,000. President Trump wrote, "People that are against tariffs are fools. We are now the richest, most respected country in the world." President Trump elaborated by writing, "We are taking in trillions of dollars and will soon be paying down our enormous debt, $37 trillion. Record investment in the USA plants and factories going up all over the place. So the money left over after the $2,000 dividend check will be used to pay down the national debt." In a statement released in September, the U.S. Treasury Department said that in fiscal year 2025, which ended on September 30th, the federal government received $195 billion in tariff revenue. President Trump is proposing that all Americans share in this wealth. He said a dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high-income people, will be paid to everyone. For consumers, profit-sharing programs should be very popular since cost of living pressures continue to climb and the government shutdown continues. The proposal would likely need the support of Congress to pass, though. In July, Senator Josh Hawley introduced the American Worker Rebate Act, which aimed to use tariff revenue for tax rebates of at least $600 per adult and child determined by income level. And yesterday, during an interview with ABC News, Bissent suggested that the $2,000 dividend could come in lots of forms.
It could be just the tax decreases that we are seeing on the president's agenda. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security, deductibility of auto loans. So, those are substantial deductions that, are being financed in the tax bill.
The Trump administration has reached a multi-million-dollar agreement with Cornell University to restore over $250 million in federal funding to the institution. The total settlement amount is $60 million. Cornell University President Michael Kodikoff has informed the entire faculty and student body that $30 million of this will be paid to the government over 3 years. The remaining $30 million will be allocated over the next 3 years to strengthen agricultural research in the United States, which will benefit American farmers. Once the agreement is in place, the federal government will reinstate Cornell's previously frozen grants and research awards totaling over $250 million and conclude its civil rights and admissions investigations into the university. Cornell also agreed to provide the government with the undergraduate admissions data through 2028 on race, grade point average, and performance on standardized tests for the Trump administration to analyze whether race is used to determine college admissions. Kodikoff emphasized that Cornell's settlement prioritized the university's independence, faculty, students, and curriculum. Kodikoff said, "It was very important for us to secure and protect our own independence as a private institution, to protect our faculty and their academic freedom and free inquiry, which is fundamental to our excellence and our ability to teach students in an appropriate way and to create new knowledge." This agreement represents the Trump administration's latest achievements in its push for higher education reform. Education Secretary Linda McMahon said on X that the Cornell deal was another victory in the push to end divisive DEI policies at Ivy League universities. In March, the Trump administration launched an accountability campaign targeting elite U.S. universities. The administration pressured institutions to engage in self-examination by threatening to cut their federal funding. The issues raised included admission and employment discrimination, the inadequate handling of anti-Semitic incidents, and the misuse of taxpayer funds. At the time, 60 U.S. colleges and universities were under investigation for alleged anti-Semitism on campus. A further 45 were under investigation for participating in DEI programs, while 7 were under investigation for offering scholarships and grants to students of certain races in connection with alleged segregation. The University of Maine and the University of Pennsylvania are among those facing investigations into their policies on transgender athletes competing in female sports. President Trump's policies largely stem from conservative dissatisfaction with the American higher education system. For years, American universities have been dominated by liberal voices. Specifically, the popularity of woke culture has led colleges and universities to prioritize ideological indoctrination over the development of academic and professional skills. These institutions indoctrinate liberals on issues such as gender and race while silencing conservative voices. This content was further exacerbated during the pandemic, prompting voters to reject notions and movements such as CRT, gender identity, DEI policy, and pro-Palestinian protests. Freezing government funding was a very effective method. Soon, Columbia University, one of the most high-profile targets, was the first to compromise. Columbia University agreed to pay $200 million as a settlement. Next, Brown University paid $50 million as a settlement. The University of Pennsylvania also agreed to ban biological males from participating in women's sports and to restore the records of women athletes. Nearly 200 colleges and universities across the United States have removed DEI policy content that President Trump deemed harmful and unethical from their websites. And they closed DEI offices on campus and canceled events. Harvard has launched a legal battle, though, but continues to explore a settlement. President Trump said in September that a deal with Harvard was close. In August of this year, President Trump further demanded that colleges and universities across the U.S. disclose their admission rates, enrollment numbers, and average GPA and SAT scores by race and gender. This was seen as an important step in promoting transparency in higher education and opposing DEI policy. The Trump administration's policies, coupled with the Supreme Court ruling in favor of Students for Fair Admissions lawsuit against Harvard University for discriminating against Asian students in the admissions process, have changed the situation in which colleges and universities previously admitted students on a non-merit basis, which is in violation of the Civil Rights Act. The latest enrollment data from Harvard University, the oldest in the country, shows that the proportion of Asian undergraduates has reached a new high of 41%, up from 37% last year and 29.8% in 2023. Meanwhile, black students account for 11.5% of the freshman class, which is a decrease of 2.5 percentage points from last year and 5.1 percentage points from 2020. And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you so much for your support of Front Page. Please remember to leave a comment below the video. This is really helping us to be seen all around the world. The more people who watch Front Page, the more freedom-loving people the world will have. And please hit the like button and hit the notification bell after subscribing. And please share this video with your friends and family because everybody deserves to know the truth.